The massive alien warship appeared out of nowhere at the edge of our solar system. It was huge, black as night, and covered in battle scars from destroying other worlds. This was the Death's Herald, the flagship of the Valkyrian Empire. They had come for Earth. Commander Thexmore sat in his command chair, looking at the small blue planet in the distance. He had done this 17 times before. 17 different alien races had surrendered when they saw his ship. Some begged. Some cried. Some tried to negotiate, but they all gave up in the end. He opened a communication channel that would reach every radio, television, and computer on Earth. His voice was cold and mechanical as it echoed across the planet. Humans of Earth. I am Commander Thexmore of the Valkyrian Empire. You have exactly 72 hours to surrender completely. Lay down all weapons. Abandon all resistance. Submit to our rule. If you refuse, we will destroy every city, every town, every living thing on your world. You have seen what happened to the others. Do not make us demonstrate our power. The transmission ended. Silence filled the void of space. On Earth's main orbital station, Admiral Kim stared at the view screen showing the alien ship. He was a quiet man, someone who thought carefully before speaking. He had studied the reports from other worlds the Empire had conquered. He knew exactly what surrender meant for humanity. Captain Park stood beside him, trying to keep his hands steady. Sir, what are your orders? Kim took a deep breath. He thought about his daughter back on Earth. He thought about his elderly parents. He thought about every human being living their lives down on that blue planet, not knowing their world had just changed forever. Connect me to the global emergency network, Kim said quietly. Within minutes, every screen on Earth flickered to life. In apartments in Seoul, families gathered around their televisions. In offices in New York, workers stopped typing and looked up at the monitors. In schools across Europe, children turned from their lessons to watch. Even in remote villages without electricity, people crowded around battery-powered radios. Admiral Kim's face appeared on billions of screens. He looked tired but determined. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke. My fellow humans, we have received a message from an alien empire. They want us to surrender. They want us to become their slaves. They have given us 3 days to decide. He paused, looking directly into the camera as if he could see every person watching. I have studied what happens to species that surrender to this empire. They are worked to death in mines. Their children are taken away. Their culture is erased. Their freedom disappears forever. Kim's voice grew stronger. So I will tell you what I told their commander. We choose to stand together. Those 5 words spread across the planet like wildfire. In living rooms, people looked at each other and nodded. In workplaces, colleagues shook hands. In schools, teachers hugged their students. Something incredible happened in the hours that followed. Something the Valkyrian Empire had never seen before in all their conquests. Nobody ran. Not a single human tried to escape Earth. No ships launched toward distant star systems. No wealthy families fled to hidden bunkers in other galaxies. Instead, something else began happening. Factory worker Choi looked at the assembly line where he built cars every day. He walked over to his supervisor's office and knocked on the door. We need to start making weapons, he said simply. The supervisor nodded. Within an hour, the entire factory had stopped making cars and started producing missiles. Across the city, Dr. Lee was in her laboratory working on cancer research. She looked at her medical supplies and equipment, then began calculating how to turn them into explosives. Teacher Han gathered her elementary school students in a circle. We're going to play a new game, she told them with a smile. It's called How to Help Grown-Ups Fight Bad Guys. The children giggled and raised their hands eagerly. In a small fishing village, 70-year-old grandmother Nam walked to the Iyam community center where other elderly residents were gathering. The village leader looked worried. What should we tell people to do, he asked. Grandmother Nam picked up a kitchen knife and tested its sharpness against her thumb. We tell them to get ready to fight. But you're 73 years old. Someone protested. She smiled. Exactly, I've lived my life, now I can use it to protect theirs. Similar scenes played out in every corner of Earth. Accountants learned to make explosives from office supplies. Nurses figured out how to turn hospitals into fortresses. Bus drivers mapped out attack routes through city streets. The alien commander, Thexmore, watched all this through his surveillance systems. His tactical computer analyzed millions of human communications, looking for signs of panic or surrender. Instead, it found grocery lists that were actually weapon inventories, birthday party invitations that were really meeting times for resistance cells, lullabies that contained coded instructions for sabotage operations. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "the humans appear to be in denial. They're continuing their normal daily activities." Thexmore nodded. He had seen this before. Some species went into shock when faced with inevitable defeat. They would snap out of it soon enough and beg for mercy. But deep in his mind, a small voice whispered something troubling. In all his previous conquests, there had always been some who tried to run. There had always been some who begged for special treatment. There had always been some who offered to betray their own kind in exchange for their lives. Not this time. Every single human, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, seemed to have made the same choice. They would rather die free than live, as slaves. And that was something the Valkyrian Empire had never encountered before. Dr. Lee had spent 15 years developing treatments for cancer. Her laboratory was filled with chemicals that could save lives. Now she was learning how to use those same chemicals to take lives instead. She carefully mixed compounds that would normally heal damaged cells. But when combined differently, they became something much more dangerous. Her hands were steady as she worked. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. "How many can you make?" asked her research assistant, Min. "Enough," Dr. Lee replied, not looking up from her work. "More than enough." Across the city, factory foreman Choi walked through the assembly line where his team had built cars for 20 years. The machinery hummed as it always did, but now it was creating something entirely different. "Yunho, how are the modifications coming?" Choi called to one of his best welders. Yunho looked up from where he was attaching explosive charges to what used to be car frames. "These will punch through their armor like paper," he said with satisfaction. "We can make 50 a day if we work double shifts." "Then we work double shifts," Choi said simply. In elementary schools across the country, children were learning new lessons. Teacher Han had turned her classroom into something that looked like a normal school day, but was actually military training. "Remember the hiding game we practiced yesterday?" she asked her 7-year-old students. They nodded eagerly. "Today, we're going to learn the pointing game." Little Jisoo raised her hand. "Is this to help fight the bad aliens, Teacher Han?" Han smiled and ruffled the girl's hair. "Yes, sweetheart. You're all going to be very important helpers." The children giggled and paid close attention as she taught them how to spot enemy positions and relay information to the adults. They thought it was the best game ever. High above Earth, Valkyrian scout ships monitored human communications with growing confusion. Their advanced listening devices picked up millions of conversations every hour. They fed all this information to their computers, searching for signs of military planning or panic. Instead, they found ordinary people talking about ordinary things. "Don't forget to pick up milk on your way home," a woman told her husband over the phone. "Soccer practice is moved to 6 o'clock, a coach texted his team parents. "Grandma's birthday dinner is this Sunday. Bring the special cake," someone wrote. In an email. The alien intelligence officer, Kexvar, studied these reports with growing satisfaction. "Commander, the humans are clearly in psychological shock. They're continuing their normal routines as if nothing has changed." Thexmore nodded. "Good. This is exactly what we expected. When reality sets in, they'll be even more eager to surrender." But the aliens had no idea what those innocent messages really meant. When Jin told his wife to pick up milk, he wasn't talking about groceries. He was telling the subway demolition team to prepare the explosive charges under the main transit tunnels. When Coach Park moved soccer practice to 6 o'clock, he was coordinating sniper positions in the school building. The parents who received that message weren't bringing their children to sports. They were bringing rifles and ammunition. When Minsu mentioned Grandma's special cake, he was confirming that the improvised mortars hidden in his neighborhood were ready to fire. Every conversation was a military communication disguised as normal life. Millions of humans had learned this code in just 2 days, passing it from person to person without ever writing it down or explaining it over monitored channels. The most remarkable part was how naturally everyone adapted to this new reality. Baker Kyung continued making bread every morning, but now each loaf contained detailed maps of alien landing zones drawn in rice flour. Postal worker Dong Yun still delivered mail, but the letters contained ammunition and weapon parts. Even the children contributed without understanding the full danger. 10-year-old Shungjin thought he was playing hide-and-seek when he crawled through the ventilation system of his apartment building, mapping every passage for the adults who would later fill them with explosives. The most surprising volunteers came from the nursing homes and retirement communities. Grandmother Nam had lived through 3 wars in her 73 years. She had seen her country occupied by foreign armies before. She knew what defeat really meant. "I want to join the special volunteer group," she told the community organizer, who was secretly recruiting for suicide missions. "Mrs. Nam, these missions are very dangerous," the organizer said gently. She laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Young man, I raised 5 children through 2 wars and a famine. I buried my husband and 3 of my friends this year. What exactly do you think I'm afraid of?" Her granddaughter Yoonji tried to protest. "Grandmother, please don't do this." The old woman took her granddaughter's hands in her weathered ones. "Sweet child, I lived through the wars so you could have peace. Now it's my turn to fight so you can have freedom." Across the planet, thousands of elderly humans made the same choice. They had lived full lives. They had seen their children and grandchildren grow up. Now they could use their remaining years to buy time and safety for the next generation. What amazed the younger volunteers was how cheerful the elderly were about their deadly assignments. They joked while learning to use explosives. They sang old songs while preparing weapons. They shared family recipes while planning their final missions. "We've been preparing for death our whole lives," explained retired teacher Kim. "Now we finally get to choose how we die." The alien commander Thexmore reviewed the intelligence reports one more time. Everything indicated that humans were simply going about their normal lives, perhaps too shocked to process their situation. "They're weaker than we thought," he told his officers. "When we land, they'll probably welcome us just to end their uncertainty." None of the aliens realized that 8 billion humans were working together in perfect, silent coordination. They had no experience with a species that could organize total resistance while appearing completely normal. In 72 hours, the Valkyrian Empire would learn that sometimes the quietest enemies are the most dangerous ones. The 72 hours were up. Commander Thexmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his armada of 200 warships descended through Earth's blue sky like falling stars. Each ship carried 500 elite soldiers bred for conquest. They had done this so many times before. "All ships report ready for landing," his communications officer announced. Thexmore nodded with satisfaction. "Begin the occupation. Target major population centers first. Standard protocol." The first wave of dropships screamed through the atmosphere toward their assigned targets. The largest group headed for Seoul, South Korea's capital city. Intelligence reports showed it was a major business center with millions of civilians who would surrender quickly once they saw the empire's power. Lead dropship touched down in the middle of downtown Seoul, right in the financial district. The massive vessel's landing thrusters scorched the pavement of what used to be a busy intersection. Steam rose from the hot metal as the ship's doors hissed open. Elite Valkyrian shock troops marched out in perfect formation. These soldiers were 8 feet tall, covered in black armor, and carrying weapons that could vaporize a human with one shot. They had conquered 17 worlds. They expected terrified civilians to run screaming. Instead, they found something impossible. The streets weren't empty. Hundreds of humans stood waiting for them. Office workers in business suits, shop clerks still wearing their name tags, students with backpacks, all of them holding weapons. Not military weapons, kitchen knives, baseball bats, hammers, broken bottles. tools stolen from construction sites. For a moment, both sides just stared at each other. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "For Earth!" and 800 humans charged at 500 alien soldiers. Security guard Zhang had worked in the same office building for 12 years. He knew every hallway, every elevator, every emergency exit. When the aliens tried to secure the building, he led them into the basement where he had spent 2 days setting up a surprise. "Welcome to Earth," he said with a smile, pressing the detonator. The explosion killed him instantly. It also killed 3 alien soldiers and brought down half the building's support structure. The remaining aliens found themselves trapped in a maze of rubble and twisted metal, being hunted by office workers who knew every hiding spot. Accountant Yoon had never held a weapon in her life. She was a quiet woman who spent her days working with numbers and spreadsheets. But when the aliens entered the subway system beneath her building, she grabbed a kitchen knife from the building's cafeteria and followed them underground. "You want our world," she screamed, leading 50 other office workers in a charge through the dark tunnels. "Come and take it." The aliens had advanced armor and energy weapons. The humans had nothing but fury and determination. But in the narrow subway tunnels, the aliens couldn't use their superior technology effectively. It became hand-to-hand combat in the dark, and the humans knew these tunnels like their own homes. Yoon died in that tunnel, but she took 2 alien soldiers with her. The humans behind her stepped over her body and kept fighting. In the port city of Busan, 70-year-old fisherman Kang had spent 50 years on the water. His small fishing boat was older than some of the people fighting on shore, but it still ran perfectly. He had maintained it with love and care for decades. When he saw alien landing craft approaching the harbor, he started his boat's engine 1. Last time, the aliens' tactical computers detected the small vessel approaching their formation. They dismissed it as irrelevant. One fishing boat couldn't damage their armored landing craft. They were wrong. Kang had filled his boat with every explosive device the local resistance could spare. As he steered toward the largest alien ship, he began singing an old folk song his grandfather had taught him. His voice carried across the water, clear and strong despite his age. "Arirang, arirang, arario," he sang, guiding his boat directly into the alien craft's hull. "Arirang gogai ro, neomeo ganda." The explosion lit up the harbor like a second sunrise. Kang's boat and the alien landing craft disappeared in a ball of fire and smoke. 3 other alien vessels were damaged by flying debris. The remaining ships had to change course, giving the shore defenses more time to prepare. Across the city, Nurse Song was turning her hospital into something the aliens had never encountered before. She had 20 years of medical experience and knew exactly how to keep wounded fighters alive long enough to return to battle. But she also knew how to kill. The hospital's upper floors became sniper nests. Doctors and nurses who had spent their careers saving lives now took them with surgical precision. Between treating wounded resistance fighters, they coordinated attacks on alien positions throughout the city. "Patient in room 304 needs immediate attention," Song announced over the hospital's communication system. The doctors knew this wasn't about a patient. Room 304 was code for the alien command post 3 blocks away. Within minutes, sniper fire from the hospital's roof forced the aliens to abandon their position. Song worked for 18 hours straight, switching between performing surgery and calling in artillery strikes. She saved 30 human lives that day and ended at least a dozen alien ones. What broke the aliens' confidence wasn't just the human resistance, it was how the humans fought. In every previous conquest, enemy soldiers had fought desperately to stay alive. They tried to retreat when overwhelmed. They surrendered when defeat was certain. They begged for mercy when captured. Humans did none of these things. When surrounded, they laughed and told jokes while fighting to the death. When mortally wounded, they used their last breath to take an alien soldier with them. When captured, they smiled and activated hidden explosives. Soldier Vextal had fought in 6 conquest campaigns. He had seen brave enemies and cowardly ones. He had never seen enemies who treated their own deaths as victories. "They're insane," he reported to his commander after barely surviving an attack by human children armed with homemade bombs. "They celebrate dying if they can kill one of us." By the end of the first day, the aliens had learned a terrible truth. Every human casualty came at the cost of multiple alien lives. The humans weren't trying to win in any traditional sense. They were trying to make conquest so expensive that the Empire would give up, and it was working. The landing zones that should have been secure bases became graveyards filled with both human and alien bodies. The cities that should have surrendered became death traps where every building held hidden fighters. For the first time in their 300-year expansion across the galaxy, the Valecrian Empire faced an enemy that considered mutual destruction an acceptable outcome. They had no idea how to fight such an enemy. The alien commander Thexmore stared at the glowing screens in his command ship, his 6 eyes blinking in disbelief. 3 days had passed since his mighty fleet began their invasion of Earth, and the numbers dancing across his displays told a story he never expected to see. His elite shock troops, the feared Void Reapers who had conquered 17 worlds without breaking a sweat, were being cut down like wheat before a scythe. These weren't ordinary soldiers they were fighting. These were creatures who seemed to have forgotten how to quit. On the first day, Thexmore had laughed when human military units retreated from his landing zones. He thought they were cowards, running like scared animals. How wrong he had been. Those retreats weren't signs of defeat. They were tactical movements, drawing his forces into carefully prepared killing fields. The reports flooding in painted a picture that chilled even his battle-hardened heart. In the city of Chicago, a small grocery store owner named Lim had held off an entire squad of alien warriors for 2 hours. When his hunting rifle finally jammed after the 100th shot, the man didn't surrender. Instead, he grabbed a broken wine bottle and charged, screaming something about his daughter's future. It took 5 Void Reapers to bring him down, and even then he kept fighting until his last breath. In Seoul, a university student called Ryu turned her dormitory into a chemical warfare laboratory. Using nothing but cleaning supplies and her chemistry textbooks, she created toxic gas clouds that sent entire platoons of alien soldiers fleeing in terror. When they finally cornered her on the roof, she was still mixing compounds, her backpack full of homemade explosives. But perhaps most disturbing of all were the children. On Kepler 7, children had wept and begged for mercy. On Proxima Station, they had hidden under beds until the conquest was complete. Here on Earth, children sang nursery rhymes that contained sniper coordinates. They played games that were actually coded messages to resistance fighters. Some carried teddy bears stuffed with surveillance equipment. Thexmore had conquered worlds where adult warriors fought bravely and died with honor. But he had never seen a species where even the youngest members treated war like a family tradition, passed down through generations. The breaking point came on the 3rd day when he made the decision that had crushed the spirit of every other world he had conquered. He ordered orbital bombardment of the major population centers. Surely, he thought, watching their cities burn would make these humans see reason. The first target was New York. The energy beams lanced down from space, striking the towering buildings, with enough force to level mountains. Thexmore watched through his tactical displays, expecting to see panic, chaos, and surrender. Instead, he saw the truth that made his blood run cold. The buildings collapsed exactly as planned, but nobody died. The humans had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. Every major city was connected by a vast network of underground tunnels, bunkers, and shelters. They had turned their entire civilization into one massive fortress, hidden beneath the surface. As his bombardment continued, resistance fighters emerged from subway tunnels, sewer systems, and basement hideouts. They struck at his ground forces with renewed fury, as if the destruction of their surface cities had only made them angrier. The reports from his field commanders grew more desperate by the hour. In London, fighters emerged from the old world, wore 2 tube tunnels, carrying weapons that looked like they had been crafted in basement workshops. In Tokyo, entire neighborhoods seemed to vanish underground, only to reappear behind enemy lines with military precision. His officers began requesting permission to withdraw. These proud warriors who had stood firm against the crystal beings of Andromeda and the hive minds of the Outer Rim were now questioning whether any world was worth conquering if it fought like this. Thexmore found himself facing a truth that no other alien commander in the galaxy's history had ever confronted. Humans didn't just fight to win battles or protect territory. They fought as if the very concept of surrender had been surgically removed from their minds. He watched a video feed from Berlin, where an elderly woman was teaching her grandchildren how to make improvised weapons from kitchen utensils. In Moscow, factory workers had converted their assembly lines to produce ammunition instead of automobiles. In São Paulo, musicians were writing songs that contained military codes. This wasn't just a war. This was an entire species that had decided death was preferable to defeat. They would literally burn their own world to ash before they would kneel to conquerors. As Thexmore stared at the tactical displays showing his dwindling forces and the humans' impossible resistance, he began to understand something that would haunt him forever. Some species weren't meant to be conquered. Some worlds came with a price too terrible to pay. 6 months had crawled by since the first alien ships darkened Earth's skies, and now those same vessels were limping away from the solar system like wounded animals fleeing a predator. What had started as the Empire's most routine conquest had become their greatest nightmare. Commander Thexmore stood alone in his command chamber, watching the last of his fleet struggle toward the jump point. Of the massive armada that had arrived with over 2 million elite troops, barely 8% remained alive. The rest lay buried in the rubble of human cities, or floated frozen in the vacuum of space around Earth's orbital defense platforms. The planet below looked like a dying ember. Entire continents were scarred with impact craters where orbital bombardments had tried and failed to break human resistance. Radiation clouds drifted over what used to be major cities. The blue-green jewel that had once been Earth now glowed, with the sick yellow light of atomic fires. 2 billion humans had died in the fighting. 2 billion. The number should have meant victory for the Empire. On any other world, losing half the population would have triggered immediate surrender. But Earth wasn't any other world. Even now, as his ships prepared to flee, Thexmore could see the lights. Tiny pinpricks of illumination scattered across the devastated continents, each one representing a human settlement that refused to die. They were already rebuilding, already planning, already preparing for the next war that might come in a decade or a century. The final battle had taken place in the ruins of Geneva, where the last major human military command had made their stand. Thexmore had thrown everything he had left at that underground complex, expecting to finally crush the human spirit. Instead, he had watched in horror as children emerged from the bunkers alongside soldiers, all of them fighting with the same terrifying intensity. A 12-year-old girl had looked him straight in the eye as she pulled the pin from a grenade, taking out an entire squad of his best warriors. She hadn't shown fear or hatred. She had smiled, as if she was honored to die fighting rather than live kneeling. That image haunted Thexmore as he prepared his final report to the Empire Council. How do you explain to your superiors that you've encountered a species that treats death like an old friend? How do you tell the galaxy's most powerful civilization that you found something they should be afraid of? His report, marked with the highest classification levels, contained detailed analysis of human military capabilities, population centers, and industrial capacity. But all of that was secondary to his main recommendation, written in stark, simple language that would echo through Imperial halls for generations. Quarantine Sol system immediately, he wrote. Humans are a contagion of resistance. They choose death over chains, making death itself meaningless. Any attempt to conquer or control this species will result in catastrophic losses that serve no strategic purpose. He paused before adding the final line. Some worlds are not meant to be conquered. This is one of them. The Empire Council. Those ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years read Thexmore's report in stunned silence. They had seen worlds fight bravely. They had encountered species that preferred death to slavery. But they had never seen anything like the statistical analysis of human resistance patterns. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in Imperial history, they declared an entire star system forbidden territory. Automated warning beacons were deployed at the edge of the solar system, broadcasting a simple message in 1,000 alien languages. Quarantined, dangerous species, do not engage. But the Empire's fear did something they never expected. Word began to spread through the galaxy's conquered worlds like wildfire. Whispered conversations in alien marketplaces carried stories of the humans who didn't flinch. Underground resistance. Cells on distant planets passed along tales of a species that made the mighty empire turn and run. On the mining world of Kepler 442, workers began to organize for the first time in centuries. On the agricultural planet of Tau Ceti Prime, farmers started looking at their imperial overseers with new expressions in their eyes. The word rebellion began appearing in languages where it had been forgotten for generations. The empire had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten a simple truth. Fear works both ways. If the conquerors could be made afraid, then maybe they weren't as invincible as everyone believed. Back on Earth, the survivors emerged from their underground cities and began the long process of healing their world. They cleared radioactive debris with the same methodical determination they had shown in battle. They replanted forests in contaminated soil with the same stubborn refusal to quit that had defined their resistance. Children who had never seen a blue sky worked alongside. Grandparents who remembered when the oceans were clean. They built new cities designed to withstand orbital bombardment. They established schools where military tactics were taught alongside mathematics and literature. The galaxy's greatest empire had learned to fear, and humanity had taught them the lesson. Earth stood alone, but unbroken, a small blue world that had faced the infinite darkness and refused to blink. In the end, the humans had won something more valuable than victory. They had won their freedom and given hope to every enslaved world in the galaxy. The Empire might return someday, but they would never again underestimate the species that chose death over chains.